You want to know about the weird stuff? Hell, I've been working nights at Riverside Memorial for 15 years. And let me tell you, the dead don't always stay quiet. But what happened with Mrs. Henshaw? That still gives me the shivers. It was late October, around 2 a.m. Thick fog had rolled in from the river, the kind that makes everything look like a damn horror movie. I was about halfway through my shift, just finished loading Mrs. Henshaw into Chamber 3. Routine stuff, elderly lady, natural causes, family already held the service. Nothing unusual in the paperwork. I'd stepped out to grab my coffee when I heard it. This soft, metallic ringing coming from Chamber 3. At first, I figured it was just the equipment settling. These old machines make all kinds of noises. But the sound kept going, rhythmic and deliberate, like someone was playing a tiny bell. When I opened the chamber door to check, I nearly dropped my mug. Mrs. Henshaw was sitting upright on the gurney, her head tilted to one side like she was listening to something. Her eyes were still closed, thank God, but her hands were moving. Now, I've seen plenty of weird post-mortem stuff. Bodies shift, gases escape, muscles contract. But this was different. Her fingers were delicately pressing something against her chest, and that's when I saw it. An ornate little music box, no bigger than my palm, clutched in her hands. The ringing was coming from inside the box. I should have called my supervisor. Hell, I should have called a priest. Instead, I found myself walking closer, drawn in by that haunting little melody. It wasn't like any song I'd ever heard, but somehow it felt familiar, like a half-remembered lullaby from childhood. Mrs. Henshaw's lips weren't moving, but I swear I could hear humming mixing with the music box tune. Soft and sad, like someone singing alone in an empty room. That's when I noticed the paperwork was wrong. According to the intake form, she died with no personal effects. But here was this beautiful antique music box, silver with tiny engraved dancers that spun around when the melody played. I spent the rest of my shift researching Mrs. Henshaw online. Turns out she'd been a piano teacher for 43 years, never married, no kids. The obituary mentioned she'd planned a final recital before her retirement, had sent invitations to all her former students, spent weeks preparing pieces she'd taught over the decades. Nobody came. She died 3 days later, alone in her apartment above the music school. Heart attack, they said. The neighbors found her a week later when the smell got bad. Reading that broke something in me. I went back to Chamber 3, and Mrs. Henshaw was lying flat again, peaceful. But the music box was still there, still playing that melancholy tune. I couldn't go through with the cremation. Not yet. I called the funeral home, told them there'd been a delay with the equipment. Then I did something that probably sounds crazy. I sat with her for the rest of the night, listening to that music box play the same song over and over. As dawn broke through the fog, I finally understood what the melody was. It was for Elise, but played slowly, mournfully, like a goodbye. Mrs. Henshaw had been a teacher to the end, giving one last lesson to anyone willing to listen. When I finally completed the cremation the next evening, something strange happened. The music box should have melted in the heat, but when I opened the chamber, there it was among the ashes, completely intact, though the melody had finally stopped. I should have followed protocol and disposed of it with the remains. Instead, I kept it, took it home, put it on my kitchen table. It never played again, but sometimes late at night when the house is quiet, I think I hear that soft humming. The weird part, after that night, other crematory operators started calling me about similar cases. Bodies found with instruments they shouldn't have had, old teachers and musicians who died alone. All of them making some kind of music even after death. We started calling them ringers. The ones who couldn't let go of their final performance. Last month, I got word that the old music school where Mrs. Henshaw taught is being demolished. They're clearing out the building, found a storage room full of old sheet music and programs from student recitals going back decades. Right there on top was a program for a recital that never happened, dated 3 days before Mrs. Henshaw died. The featured piece was for Elise. I keep that music box on my nightstand now. Some nights, especially when the fog rolls in thick from the river, I take it out and hold it, wondering if she's still out there somewhere, still waiting for her students to come to class. The dead don't always rest easy, especially the ones who spent their lives giving pieces of themselves to others. Mrs. Henshaw taught me that. She also taught me that some songs are too important to let die, even when the person singing them is gone. That music will play again someday. I'm sure of it. And when it does, maybe someone will finally be there to listen. Story 2. I've been running day shift at Maple Grove Crematory for 8 years now, and I thought I'd seen everything. Bodies come in, families say goodbye, personal effects get cataloged and returned. Simple process, dignified and respectful. That's how it's supposed to work. But about 6 months ago, things started going sideways in ways I still can't fully explain. It began with small stuff going missing. A wedding ring here, a pair of reading glasses there. At first, I blamed the new guy, Marcus. Figured he was being careless with the intake procedures. These items are sacred to families. You lose someone's wedding ring, and you've got a lawsuit on your hands, not to mention the emotional devastation. I started double-checking everything myself. Every piece of jewelry, every pair of dentures, every cherished locket got photographed and logged before we began the cremation process. But items kept disappearing anyway. The weird part was the pattern. It wasn't random theft. Someone looking to make a quick buck would have gone for the expensive stuff. Instead, we were losing the most personal items. A child's plastic bracelet from a hospital stay. An old man's lucky coin, worn smooth from decades of worry. A woman's cheap drugstore reading glasses, held together with tape. These weren't valuable items. They were irreplaceable ones. After the third family broke down crying because we couldn't return their loved one's wedding ring, I installed a security camera in the preparation room. Didn't tell anyone, not even my boss. I had to figure out what was happening. The footage from the first night was normal. Bodies came in, got processed, went into the chambers. Nothing unusual. But the second night, Jesus, I must have watched that recording 100 times, and I still don't believe what I saw. Around 3 a.m., a wedding ring just slid off a deceased woman's finger. Not fell, slid. Like invisible hands were gently working it free. The ring rolled across the table, dropped to the floor, and disappeared under the prep table. I was there at dawn, searching every inch of that room. No ring. But when I checked the old storage room at the back of the building, the one we used for broken equipment and supplies, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a shrine. Not a religious shrine, but something else entirely. Personal items arranged in careful patterns on the dusty shelves. Wedding rings in perfect circles. Glasses lined up by prescription strength. Photographs arranged by the number of people in them. It was like some obsessive collector had been organizing these things according to rules I couldn't understand. But the most unsettling part was how they were grouped. The items surrounded by the most flowers at funeral services were placed highest. The things that made family members cry the hardest were displayed most prominently. Somehow, these objects were being sorted by the depth of grief they represented. I should have called the police. Instead, I started returning items to families, telling them we'd found them in a secondary storage area. The joy on their faces when they got back their loved one's glasses or wedding ring was worth bending the truth. But within hours, every single item I'd returned appeared back in that storage room. I tried locking the door. The items appeared inside anyway. I tried removing everything and keeping it in my office. By morning, the shrine had rebuilt itself, complete with new additions from the previous day's intakes. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a thief. This was something else entirely. I started paying closer attention to the families during services. The widow who clutched her husband's reading glasses like a lifeline. The daughter who kept touching her mother's wedding ring on her own finger. The son who wore his father's watch to every family dinner for months after the funeral. These items weren't just objects, they were connections. Physical links between the living and the dead. And somehow, the most cherished ones were being collected. The breaking point came last month during Mrs. Rodriguez's service. She'd lost her husband of 52 years, and she was inconsolable. Kept talking about his lucky coin, how he'd carried it through Vietnam, through raising 4 kids, through starting his own business. It was the one thing she wanted to keep. But when I went to retrieve it from his personal effects, it was gone. I knew exactly where it would be. Sure enough, the coin was in the storage room, placed at the very center of the shrine, surrounded by the most precious items we'd ever processed. But this time, something was different. The room felt occupied. Like someone was standing just behind me, watching. I grabbed the coin and ran. Gave it to Mrs. Rodriguez personally, watched her face light up as she held it. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I had to know if it would disappear again. I went back to the crematory at midnight. The storage room door was open, and Mrs. Rodriguez was standing inside, gently placing the coin back at the center of the shrine. Except Mrs. Rodriguez's husband had been cremated 2 weeks ago. She looked at me with eyes that weren't quite right, too knowing, too peaceful. He collects the love, she said in a voice that wasn't entirely her own. The pieces of ourselves we leave behind. Someone has to keep them safe. Then she faded away like morning mist. I still work at Maple Grove. I still find missing items in that storage room. But I don't return them anymore. I've come to understand that some things are meant to be collected, preserved, protected by forces we don't fully comprehend. The dead take with them what they can't bear to leave behind. And maybe that's not such a terrible thing after all. Story 3. People think forensic cremation is just burning bodies and analyzing remains. They're not wrong, but they're not entirely right either. I've been doing this specialized work for 12 years, handling suspicious deaths, unclaimed bodies, cases where the regular funeral homes won't touch them. You learn to expect the unexpected in this line of work. But nothing prepared me for the weight problem. It started with Harold Grimsby, a homeless man found dead under the interstate overpass. No family, no friends, just another John Doe until we got lucky with fingerprints. The police report listed his estimated weight at 140 pounds. Typical for someone who'd been living rough, probably malnourished. When Harold arrived at my facility, something fell off immediately. Moving him from the transport gurney to our prep table took 3 of us instead of the usual 2. The scale read 187 pounds. I figured the cops had guessed wrong. Happens all the time with decomposed remains or when clothing adds bulk. But I double-checked our scale with certified weights. It was accurate to the ounce. Harold had somehow gained 47 pounds after death. I documented everything, took photos, ran the cremation. Standard procedure for unclaimed remains. But when I was cleaning the chamber afterward, I noticed something strange in the ash residue. Mixed in with the normal bone fragments and dental fillings were these tiny metallic specks that caught the light like stars. Under the microscope, they were unlike anything I'd seen. Not surgical implants or dental work. These fragments had an almost crystalline structure, but they weren't from any medical device in my database. I sent samples to 3 different labs for analysis. All 3 came back with the same impossible result: unknown composition. The metals didn't match any element on the periodic table. I started weighing every body that came through my facility, comparing intake weights with police reports and medical records. About 60% showed normal readings. But the other 40%, they were consistently heavier than they should be. And the longer they remained uncremated, the heavier they got. Mrs. Patterson was the case that really shook me. Suspected suicide, found in her apartment after 3 weeks. The welfare check report estimated her weight at 110 pounds. She'd been battling cancer, had wasted away to almost nothing. But when she arrived at my facility, she weighed 156 pounds. I had to keep her for additional testing, toxicology, tissue samples, the works. Legal requirement for suspected suicides. Every day I weighed her, and every day the number climbed. By day 7, she was at 163 pounds. By day 14, 171 pounds. It was like she was accumulating mass from somewhere else. The night before her scheduled cremation, I worked late finishing paperwork. Around midnight, I heard this sound from the cold storage. A deep, resonant humming, like someone singing with their mouth closed. I grabbed my flashlight and investigated. Mrs. Patterson was glowing. Not bright, just a soft luminescence emanating from under the sheet. The humming was definitely coming from her body. As I watched, frozen with fascination and terror, tiny points of light began rising from her skin like fireflies. They hovered in the air for a moment before being absorbed back into her body. That's when I understood. The extra weight wasn't physical mass. It was something else entirely. Something that accumulated after death, drawn to bodies that carried particular kinds of emotional burden. I started researching the backgrounds of my heavier cases. Harold Grimsby had been a veteran, discharged with PTSD after 3 tours in Afghanistan. He'd been carrying survivor's guilt for 15 years. Mrs. Patterson had lost her only child in a car accident and blamed herself for letting him drive that night. Case after case, the pattern emerged. The dead who carried the heaviest emotional burdens were literally becoming heavier after death. During Mrs. Patterson's cremation, the chamber temperature spiked beyond normal ranges. The body burned hotter and longer than it should have. When I opened the chamber, the usual pile of bone fragments was mixed with those same mysterious metallic specks, but in quantities I'd never seen before. Under magnification, they looked like tiny sculptures, intricate, impossible geometries that hurt to look at directly. When I tried to photograph them, the images came out blurred, as if the fragments existed slightly outside normal space. I've kept samples from every heavy case since then. My collection now fills 3 locked filing cabinets, each sample carefully labeled with the deceased's name and the weight they'd gained. The fragments from different people never mix. They maintain distinct patterns, like crystallized signatures of individual guilt and regret. Last week, I got a case that changed everything. Marcus Webb, age 34, killed in a motorcycle accident. Clean background, happy marriage, no obvious emotional baggage. His intake weight matched the hospital records exactly, 178 pounds. But as I was preparing him for cremation, I noticed something. His motorcycle jacket had a small tear near the shoulder, and inside the lining was a letter he'd never sent. An apology to his brother for a fight they'd had 5 years ago. They hadn't spoken since. By morning, Marcus weighed 184 pounds. I realized then that we all carry invisible weight. The things we never said, the forgiveness we never asked for, the love we never expressed. Most of us find ways to release these burdens while we're alive. But some people die still carrying them, and that weight has to go somewhere. The fragments I collect aren't just unknown metals. They're crystallized regret, concentrated guilt, love that was never given form. They're the physical manifestation of everything we leave unfinished when we die. I still don't know what to do with my collection. Part of me thinks I should dispose of it, let these emotional remnants finally find peace. But another part of me believes they're meant to be preserved, studied, understood. After all, if we're going to carry these burdens in life, shouldn't someone witness what they become in death? The weight of the human soul, it turns out, is measurable after all. Story 4. Night maintenance at Riverside Crematory isn't glamorous work, but it pays decent and nobody bothers you. Just me, the machines, and the quiet. I've been doing this shift for 6 years now, ever since my divorce left me needing solitude and steady income. The dead don't judge you, don't ask why you drink your coffee black at 3 a.m., don't care that you talk to yourself while you work. At least, I thought they didn't care. The voices started about 3 months ago. At first, I figured it was the buildings settling or maybe sound carrying from the street. Old buildings make noise, pipes groaning, metal expanding and contracting. But these weren't random sounds. They were conversations. The first time I really noticed was while cleaning Chamber 2. I'd shut down the system for routine maintenance, scraping residue and checking the heating elements, when I heard 2 people talking. Clear as day, like they were standing right behind me. Did you see how many people came? I never expected. The flowers were beautiful. Especially those white roses from your garden club. I hope Margaret knows how much the eulogy meant to me. She always had such a way with words. I spun around, expecting to find co-workers or maybe family members who'd gotten in somehow. Nobody there. Just me and the empty chamber. The voices faded as I stood there listening, but the conversation kept echoing in my head. It was too specific, too intimate to be my imagination. Someone had been talking about their own funeral, discussing details that would only matter to the deceased. Over the next few weeks, it happened more often. Always when I was alone, always coming from whichever chamber I was servicing. Different voices each time, but the conversations followed similar patterns. The dead were discussing their aftermath, what happened at their services, who attended, what people said about them. Mrs. Chun from Chamber 1 talked about how surprised she was that her estranged son had flown in from Seattle. She was pleased that he'd finally met his half-sister at the funeral, hoped they'd stay in touch. Old Pete from Chamber 3 was upset that his fishing buddies had told embarrassing stories during the wake, but he admitted they were funny. He was glad people were laughing instead of just crying. Sarah Williams, barely 19, killed in a car accident, kept wondering if her parents would ever forgive themselves. She wanted to tell them it wasn't their fault for letting her drive to that party. The conversations were so detailed, so specific. They knew things that had happened after they died, flower arrangements, guest lists, conversations at the reception. It was like they were watching their own funerals from some invisible balcony. I started looking forward to these midnight talks. Weird as it sounds, the dead were better company than most living people. They didn't complain about politics or ask about my personal life. They just processed their deaths, talked through their unfinished business. But then the conversations started including me. It was a Tuesday night in November when I first heard my name. I was deep cleaning the ventilation system when a familiar voice drifted from Chamber 4. That maintenance fellow, Lysander, he's been listening to us. He seems lonely. Probably hasn't had a real conversation in months. Should we be worried? The living aren't supposed to hear us. No, I think he needs this. We all need witnesses sometimes. My hands froze on the cleaning brush. They knew I could hear them. They'd been aware of me all along. Lysander, called a different voice, Mrs. Chin, I thought. Come closer. We don't bite. Against every instinct screaming at me to run, I approached chamber 4. The voices grew clearer, warmer, like old friends inviting me to sit by a fire. We've been wondering about you, said another voice. Working these hours all alone. What are you running from? I found myself talking to the empty chamber, telling them about the divorce, the custody battle I'd lost, the way silence had become my only companion. They listened without judgment, offered the kind of comfort that only comes from people who've already faced their worst fears. Death isn't the hard part, old Pete's voice explained. It's watching the people you leave behind struggle with your absence. That's the real suffering. But you can let go, added Sarah. We had to learn that. You can too. Week after week, they counseled me through my grief, helped me understand that isolation was just another form of death. They were teaching me how to live again by sharing how they'd learned to let go. Then came the night that changed everything. I was scrubbing down chamber 3 when the voices started discussing someone new. A middle-aged man divorced, estranged from his kids. Heart attack at work, found by security the next morning. Poor fellow. All alone when it happened. His ex-wife will come to the service. She still cares, even after everything. His daughter will cry. She's been wanting to call him for months. He had so much love left to give. Such a waste. The details kept coming, and with growing horror, I realized they were talking about me. My funeral. My death. When? I whispered to the chamber. Soon, came the gentle reply. But Lysander, you have a choice. You can go back to the living, try to reconnect with your daughter, find your way back to the world. Or, you can stay here with us. Keep listening. Become part of the echo chamber. The voices went quiet, leaving me alone with the decision. I could feel the pull of their offer. Eternal communion with souls who understood loneliness, who'd found peace in shared stories. No more pain, no more rejection, just endless conversations with the dead. But I thought about my daughter Emma, about the birthday cards I'd stopped sending, the phone calls I'd stopped making. The living world still held possibilities the dead could only observe. I chose the harder path. I quit that night, drove straight to Emma's apartment, knocked on her door at 4 a.m. We talked until sunrise, our first real conversation in 3 years. I'm working day shifts now at a different facility, slowly rebuilding the connections I'd let decay. But sometimes in the quiet moments I still hear them. The echo chamber calling me back, reminding me that there's always room for one more voice in their eternal conversation. The dead are patient. They can wait. Story 5. Growing up in the cremation business shapes you differently than other kids. While my friends were afraid of monsters under their beds, I was helping Dad organize memorial services and learning the proper way to handle grieving families. Death wasn't scary to me. It was just another part of life, like birth or graduation. When Dad passed 5 years ago, I inherited Willowbrook Crematory along with all his old-fashioned notions about dignity and respect for the dead. Every person deserves to be mourned, he used to say. Nobody should leave this world without someone to remember them. I thought I understood what he meant until I started seeing the eternal mourners. It began about 6 months after I took over. During a service for Mrs. Goldstein, an elderly woman whose children had all moved away, I noticed a group of people in the back row who didn't quite fit. They dressed appropriately, dark colors, somber expressions, but something felt off about them. They were too still, too quiet, and when I glanced back during the eulogy, they hadn't moved an inch. Not a shifted position, not a wiped tear, not even the subtle breathing movements you see in a room full of people. After the service, I tried to speak with them, to sign them into our guest book, but they'd vanished. No one saw them leave. The other attendees, Mrs. Goldstein's neighbor and a woman from her book club, had no idea who I was talking about. The same group appeared at the next service. And the next. Always in the back row, always silent observers, always gone before I could approach them. I started paying closer attention. There were 7 of them, an elderly man with kind eyes and worn hands, a middle-aged woman clutching a faded purse, a young mother still wearing a hospital bracelet, a teenager with old-fashioned clothes, a man in a military uniform from some long-ago war, a woman in a nurse's uniform, and a little girl holding a stuffed rabbit. They attended every single service, regardless of who had died or how many family members showed up. Rich or poor, young or old, loved or forgotten, the eternal mourners were always there. But I noticed they paid special attention to certain services. The ones where attendance was sparse. The funerals where only a few people came, where the silence felt heavy with abandonment. During those services, the eternal mourners would lean forward slightly, as if listening more intently to every word. The pattern became clear during Tommy Ricketts' service. Tommy had been homeless for years, struggling with addiction, estranged from his family. Only his case worker and a volunteer from the shelter attended. The chapel felt cavernous and empty. But the eternal mourners were more present than I'd ever seen them. The old man was quietly crying. The young mother reached out as if to comfort someone. The little girl held her stuffed rabbit closer. They were mourning Tommy with an intensity that his own family couldn't provide. I started researching the crematory's records, going back decades through Dad's meticulous files. The pattern I found chilled me to the bone. Every person in that back row had been cremated at Willowbrook. The elderly man, Harold Wickham, died alone in 1987, no family. The woman with the purse, Dorothy Chun, 1994, estranged from her children. The young mother, Lisa Rodriguez, 2003, died in childbirth. Parents had disowned her for getting pregnant. The teenager, James Sullivan, 1978, runaway who overdosed. No one ever claimed his body. They had all died alone, unmourned, forgotten. And somehow, they'd found each other in death, forming their own family of the forgotten. But why did they keep coming back? The answer revealed itself during what turned out to be my final service as the owner of Willowbrook Crematory. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was preparing for another lonely funeral. An elderly man named Walter Briggs who'd outlived everyone he'd ever known. I felt a sharp pain in my chest, dismissed it as stress, kept working. The pain got worse. I sat down for a moment, just to catch my breath. I never got back up. The paramedics said later it was a massive heart attack. Quick, they said. I probably didn't suffer much. Small comfort for dying alone in my own crematory at 34 years old. But I wasn't alone, not really. The eternal mourners were there when my consciousness flickered back. They stood around my body with the same quiet reverence they'd shown at countless services. The little girl placed her stuffed rabbit next to my hand. The woman in the nurse's uniform checked my pulse with professional gentleness, though we all knew it was too late. "Welcome," said Harold Wickham, his voice carrying the weight of decades spent watching over the forgotten. "We've been waiting for you." "Waiting for me?" Dorothy Chun smiled sadly. "You gave us purpose, child. All those years of watching, of bearing witness to the unmourned. But we needed someone to carry on the work." I understood then. I was the next keeper of the vigil, the one who would ensure that no one died truly alone. My body would be cremated, probably by whoever took over Willowbrook, but my spirit would join this strange family of eternal mourners. We attended my own funeral, of course. My cousin managed the service, did his best to honor my memory. A decent crowd showed up, neighbors, business associates, a few old friends. But in the back row sat 8 figures now instead of 7. I'm still learning the rules of this existence. We can't interact with the living, can't offer comfort beyond our presence. But we can witness. We can remember. We can ensure that every person who passes through death has someone who cares, even if that someone is a stranger who died alone decades ago. The business continues. My cousin hired a manager, and Willowbrook keeps operating much as Dad would have wanted. The eternal mourners still attend every service, and now I understand what Dad meant about everyone deserving to be mourned. Sometimes I catch glimpses of him too, sitting in the back row during the loneliest funerals, making sure his philosophy lives on. Death, it turns out, isn't the end of caring. It's just the beginning of a different kind of love.